Dear students, as part of the paper on fertility, the module titled Reproduction Motivations, Value of Children and Son Preference focuses an important dimension of the reasons for a couple to aspire for number of children and the value attached to these children, and also gender preference are important areas which we need to deliberate, and that is how this module focuses on these issues. A number of recent studies way back from Friedman 1974, Cleland of 1983 have documented evidence to show that couples have a decided preference for a particular sex combination of children. For example, in many South Asian countries, including India, there is a strong preference for sons over daughters. In fact, son preference has been considered to be one of the factors responsible for the high fertility in these countries, and it is argued that such gender preferences for children may act as a major constraint in the implementation of family planning programs, particularly in countries which are beginning to experience a fertility transition, as brought out by Kane 1984, Nag 1992. The impact of gender preference on fertility has usually been investigated by examining data relating to the sex composition of living children of couples who do not want any more children, the assumption being that if son preference has an impact on fertility, couples who have sons are much more likely to not want more children and to practice contraception. Such an impact has been documented and empirically demonstrated in several South Asian countries, as brought out by Chowdhury and Bairagi 1990. Some of the earlier studies conducted in India did not find any association between son preference and higher fertility. The first All India Family Planning Survey, for instance, found that the parity progression ratios of couples were not much affected by the sex of their living children. However, the survey did find that the desire for additional children was greatest among couples who had daughters only. India is characterized by gender gaps in many human developmental indicators. Young girls in particular remain the most disadvantaged, as brought out by the World Bank of 2012, and face significant disparities on a number of welfare measures such as mortality, nutrition, Jayachandran and Kajimko 2009, Baru 2004, and also on issues related to child care, as focused in book Varsalos et al. 2014. One prominent explanation amongst economists for such disparities is the fact that parents invest more heavily in boys than in girls. Jensen 2003, Cohen 2009 for recent examples. Moreover, girls are also discriminated against from the womb onwards. The development and spread of ultrasound technology has been associated with a rapid increase in the sex ratio at birth. In the Indian census of 2001, the sex ratio in the age group 0 to 6 years was 107.8, with some northern states having ratios of 120 to 125. The potential negative consequences of male biased sex ratios for old age support, crime, violence, labor markets, prostitution, and sexually transmitted diseases have prompted policymakers to introduce various policy measures, which mainly include banning sex selective abortions and special financial incentives for giving birth to a girl child. Son preference and discrimination against girl children are widespread in the Middle East and North Africa beyond 2001, and in South and East Asia, Chan and Yo 2002. In Asia, this has been documented in China Bannister 2003, Korea, Park and Chor 1995, Vietnam, Bellinger 2002, Nepal, Leon Matthews and Zuana 2003, and Bangladesh, Bairagi 2001, as well as India, Mishra, Roy and Rutherford 2004. The setting for these studies have brought out valuable indicators on these issues. In the past, researchers interested in son preference have had as their central concern its adverse consequences, particularly excess female infant and child mortality or the poor health of girl children relative to boys. There are several studies which have focused on these issues like Basu 1989, Das Gupta 1987, Das Gupta and Shujo 1999, Mackinson 1994, Miller 1981, Pandey 2003, Pandey and Esbeck 2003, among others. Others have examined the role of son preference in slowing the transition to low fertility as couples bear children until they have sufficient boys. Arnold, Minja and Roy 1998, Clark 2000, Das Gupta and Butt 1997, Lane et al. 2003, Yount, Longston and Hill 2000 and among others. The advent of technology permitting prenatal sex selection has shifted the focus of scholars and policymakers to sex-selective abortions and consequent distorted sex ratios as manifestations of son preference. Arnold, Kishore and Roy 2002, Murphy 2003, Woman and Ganatra 2002. In the Indian setting, distorted sex ratios have a long history. Over the 100-year period, that is from 1901 to 2001, the population-related ratios, especially in the sex ratio from various Indian census, as expressed in India as the number of women per thousand men, have shown more or less a continuous decline, that is from 972 females per thousand males in 1901 to 933 females per thousand males in 2001, as brought out by Bantier 2001. 500,000 female fetuses a year are sex selectively aborted in India alone, as revealed by Jha et al. 2006. The rise in the use of sex selective abortion in the last few years means that even more so, parents are able to implement their son preference, as brought out by Kroll 2000. As the procedure costs only between 500 rupees to 1500 rupees or $10 to $30, even poor households can afford sex determination, as focused by Booth et al. 1994. This increase in the capacity of parents to determine the gender of their children, alongside a sharp decline in the fertility rate in India in the past decades and an unmet desire for having more sons than daughters, may lead to a shortage of women in the marriage market in future decades if the trend is not reversed. This shortage of women in the marriage market is known to have an important effect at the societal level. For example, in China, an increase in kidnapping of young women, in rape, in the number of poor men being unable to find a match, and in social unrest have been documented following the shortage of women of marriageable age, and it is quoted by Das Gupta and Shujo 1999, Hudson and Denver 2002. But even without thinking of future generations, the elimination of female fetuses is morally difficult to accept. It is consequently important to understand what leads respondents to prefer sons to daughters if we want to halt this practice. There are two factors which operates as brought out by some of these studies, that is, the couple's fertility and the mortality of their sons and daughters can affect the actual proportion of sons in a family. A substantial body of research documents that couples with a strong son preference may provide less food or poor health care to their daughters. This practice may increase daughters' childhood mortality rate and thus may alter the sex composition of the surviving children. And many studies have brought out these facts. For instance, Bardhan 1974, 1982, Vasu 1989, Chen Huck and D'Souza 1981, Das Gupta 1987, D'Souza and Chen 1980, Kinch and Sen 1983, Miller 1981, Nair 1996, Sen and Sengupta 1983, Thamasis, Harris and Fairbairn 1997. Researchers have given less attention, however, to the potential effects of son preference on fertility and fertility decisions. Unlike the sex composition of surviving children, relatively few factors can affect the sex composition of children ever born. Although parents with the son preference want to produce a high proportion of sons, they may not be able to achieve this goal. Three mechanisms could affect the sex composition of children ever born. First, biological factors may influence the sex of the child. Second, where the technology is available, couples may use sex-selective abortions. Finally, couples may practice differential stopping behavior. Let's discuss in detail all these factors. Number 1. Biological factors. Some scholars have speculated that different couples have different biological propensities to have a male child. Yet, the most recent research on biological links to the sex ratio at birth shows no genetic family bias toward one sex or the other. Rogers, 1997. Most empirical research has focused on the biological effects of mother's age, father's age, birth order, race, and other socioeconomic characteristics on the likelihood of having a male child. These studies find weak evidence of effects of race and birth order on the child's health, sex. The second aspect in this regard is about sex-selective abortions. Because couples cannot biologically control the sex of a particular child, sex-selective abortion is currently the only assured way of producing a son. Although sex-selective abortion eventually may have a significant effect on the sex ratio, but sex-selective abortion was not common in India before the early 1990s. Arnold 1997, Das Gupta and Bhatt 1995, Nair 1996. Because the birth history data used were collected in 92-93 and cover all of India, the great majority of births in the sample occurred before sex determining technologies were available. Indeed, only 15% of the births in this sample occurred in northern India after 1985 and thus could possibly have been affected by sex-selective abortion. Consequently, sex-selective abortion cannot be considered a major means of affecting the sex composition of children ever born in this sample. The other aspect which we need to address is about differential stopping behavior. Even in the absence of sex-selective abortion, couples may seek to achieve their ideal number of sons through differential stopping behavior. An extensive literature documents the existence of differential stopping behavior in countries with son preference. Some of this literature focuses on the parity progression ratios of couples by the sex composition of children already born. Arnold 1997, Das 1987, Finney and E 1986, Wen 1992. Evidence from India reveals widespread use of differential stopping behavior. Couples with fewer sons are more likely to continue having children, want to have more children, or less likely to use contraception and have shorter birth intervals. There are a number of studies like Arnold 1997, Bairagi and Bhattacharya 1989, Das 1987, IAPS 1997, Mutturayappa et al. 1997, Nag 1991, North and Land 1994, Raju and Bhatt 1995. Many demographers are concerned that son preference will keep the national fertility rates high because couples who have had mainly daughters will exceed their ideal family size in their efforts to have sons. Let us focus now on the various determinants of son preference. Given the strong preference, it is very important for us to understand what are the various factors that contribute for preference for a particular gender, that is in the Indian context like son. To begin with, there are social norms and structures. A common Vedic blessing after weddings, say, may you be the mother of 100 sons, as quoted by Iyer 2002, shows the importance of male progeny in Indian culture. Many other cultural practices emphasize the importance of sons in India. For example, it is also not uncommon in Tamil Nadu, one of the Indian states, where gender inequality is the lowest, to see girls of high birth order being named Venda, that is don't want, or Podum Pennum, that is enough of daughters. These are revealed by George 1997. Another possible cause of son preference is the importance given to daughter's chastity as an important element of family honor. Hence, parents of daughters bear costs that parents of sons do not have to bear, such as the cost of patronage, as brought out by Arnold et al. 1998. Two ways of limiting the risk of a daughter jeopardizing the family honor are the practice of parda, that is female seclusion, and the practice of marrying of girls at a young age, possibly before even puberty. Those two practices limit women's capacity to bring income to their natal household and hence limit their financial worth for their natal family. The other aspect is to focus on village development. The evidence on the effect of village economic development on gender inequality as manifested in excess girls' mortality is a mixed one. Some studies have shown a worsening of discrimination against girls with greater village development, as brought out by Murthy, Gio and Drees 1995. Others show more positive results. In an all-India analysis, Kishore 1993 found that after controlling for other economic, social and cultural factors, the proportion of the labor force that was female in a district was significantly and negatively associated with excess of girls' mortality. Rahman and Rao 2004 found that village development influenced some gender equity indicators of mobility and decision making, but they did not examine son preference or excess girls' mortality. The other important variable that needs the focus is on household and individual characteristics. Parents' gender preferences for children are embedded in cultural and religious traditions and community norms, shaping individual attitudes and behavior. Children of a particular sex are often desired in order to provide certain utilities or to minimize financial or psychological costs, as brought out by Wood and Bean 1977. In traditional societies, male offspring are presumed to have greater economic net utility than daughters, since they provide assistance in agriculture as well as a primitive social security system. In some situations, however, daughters are thought to be more reliable in providing old age assistance, particularly emotional support. They are also frequently desired in order to help with household tasks or to care for younger children. Sons, on the other hand, quite often fill sex-specific religious roles and ensure kinship continuity in patrilineal societies. There is some evidence that the desire for additional children, if there is any at all, is curtailed once the minimum number of surviving male children is achieved, Wood and Bean 1977. However, even in societies with pervasive son preference, many families consider it important to have at least one daughter among their children, Arnold 1997. Most fertility surveys which seek to measure the demand for children and gender preference are confined to currently married women and hence assume that the woman's response reflects the preference of the couple. Thus, it remains unclear whether it is the men or the women who exhibit a greater demand for children, particularly male children. This issue is further complicated by the fact that conflicting theoretical formulations regarding men's and women's reproductive goals are suggested in the literature. Now, let us focus on fertility impact. Despite the existence of strong son preference, fertility has declined in several countries such as Korea, China, and in the Indian states of Punjab, Gujarat and Maharashtra, although such a decline does not necessarily indicate that son preference is unrelated to fertility. A number of studies have examined the evidence salient to the relationship between son preference and fertility. However, a consistent pattern of relationship has not been found. Regional variations, development factors and gender preference. Several studies that have focused on regional demography of India have recognized basic differences in gender inequalities, development and demographic behavior between the northern and southern states. For instance, studies conducted by Bardhan 1974, Dyson and Morey 1983, Basu 1992, Kishore 1993, Malhotra et al. 1995, Murthy et al. 1995. Southern Indian states are known to have comparative social development advantages over northern Indian states. This includes higher female literacy and coverage in maternal and child health care services and low infant mortality. Culturally, South Indian states have a kinship structure favoring a more egalitarian women's status norm, and thus they portray greater equality between the sexes compared with the striking gender inequalities in the north. Now, let us discuss what are the factors that influence regional versus developmental issues on gender preference. Researchers have often pointed out that son preference exists more strongly in the economically well-developed states of Punjab, Haryana, Gujarat and Maharashtra than in the poorer states of Uttar Pradesh, Rajasthan and Madhya Pradesh. Gujarat and Maharashtra are also known as progressive states in terms of social development. From this context, it is suggested that the preference for sons tends to be stronger among educated women as well as among women in economically better off households. However, the evidence relating to the hypothesis of whether developmental factors also influence the regional gender preference effects on contraception and fertility has not been clearly examined so far. The framework of regional influences of culture compared with the developmental influences on gender preference and their consequent effects on contraception and fertility are important dimensions of demographic behavior. In order to examine the influence of gender preference compared with the developmental factors on contraception and fertility, separate regional models were constructed by stratum of developmental factors, women's education and indices of household economic status. The sex-wise living number of children is used as a predictor and with the socio-economic factors held constant in the models. In the recent study, Jijabai and Kulkarni in 1989 observed that although the differences between the fertility preferences of husbands and wives were small, wives as compared to their husbands tended to desire a somewhat greater number of children as well as sons, and these differences tended to increase with age. Moreover, women's family size desires were primarily shaped by their concern for support from sons in old age, while men desired sons mainly for cultural and religious reasons. Although one would expect that the patriarchal social structure prevalent in India, particularly in North India, would result in unequal fertility desires among men and women. Not many studies have focused on these differences. Previous studies conducted in India on gender differences in fertility desires are few and far from conclusive. Since sex preference is only one of many factors that might affect fertility, some attempts have been made to examine the influence of sex preference on fertility in a multivariate framework. Kohn and Sirizelden 1977, Reperto 1972. In conclusion, we can see from these that there is a region-wise the effect of gender preference on contraception, which is the largest in the western region, followed by northern and north central regions, and the lowest in the southern, followed by eastern regions. Also, gender preference effects on fertility follow nearly the same regional pattern. When we consider that several of the key variables which account for individual or household socioeconomic status variations have also been included as predictors in the model, these effects by sex composition of children clearly represents the regional influences that is contributed by the patriarchal norm of son preference. Arnold et al. 1988 concluded that the gender preference effects across the states do not trace a U-shaped relationship with fertility. In contrast, the regional pattern indicates that there is a close correspondence between the degree of son preference and its effects on contraception and fertility regardless of the level of fertility. This supports the conclusion found in many other studies that son preference is the most important determinant of contraception and fertility. Students, in this module, we are able to focus on the reproduction behavior of couples, especially when they see the value of children with a special focus on preference for son. The studies that have focused the various issues that are surrounding the issues related to son preference, issues related to sex preference, and also the value attached to children are important aspects that we need to know when we are talking about the fertility behavior of couples with a special focus on woman's desire and her involvement in contraception and adoption of small family size.